Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's story, do me a huge favor and smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss a single second of the train wreck that is about to unfold. Now, let's get into it. No, Stephen, of course, he's not coming. Can you imagine? It would be mortifying. The voice was my daughter's, Amelia's, but it was laced with a venom I'd never heard before. It was a cold, dismissive tone she usually reserved for slow waiters or incompetent cashiers. I was in the next room, supposedly napping on the old couch in my study, the one with the worn-out floral pattern my late wife, Clara, had picked out decades ago. I was just resting my eyes, not truly asleep, a state common for a man my age. The walls of my small, modest house are thin, a fact for which I was suddenly devastatingly grateful. His old truck, his worn-out clothes, your parents would have a stroke. They think I come from a good family. We just can't have him there, tainting the image a pause. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of her fiancé, Stephen, speaking on the other end. Then Amelia's voice again, sharp and final. I told you I'll handle it. I'll just tell him it's a very small, intimate affair. He'll understand. He always does. She thought I couldn't hear her. She thought I was just the poor, broken old man in the corner, the relic of a bygone era she had to tolerate out of familial obligation. She thought I would just understand. For a long moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The air in my lungs turned to ice, and the familiar scent of old books and lemon polish in my study became suffocating. This was my daughter, my Amelia. The little girl whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose bedtime stories I'd read until my voice was hoarse, whose college tuition I'd paid for by selling the last, most precious piece of my old life. She was ashamed of me, so ashamed that the man who had raised her, who had loved her more than life itself, was not worthy of watching her walk down the aisle. The pain was a physical thing, a white-hot poker searing through my chest. But then, as the initial shock subsided, something else began to bubble up from the depths of my soul. It was cold, it was hard, and it was utterly resolute. She was about to learn that the poor old man had a few secrets, and she was about to learn, in the most public and humiliating way possible, that you should never, ever underestimate the person you're trying to discard. She wanted a wedding without me? Oh, she was going to get it. But it wasn't going to be the wedding she dreamed of. Not by a long shot. To understand the depth of her betrayal, you have to understand what I gave up for her. My life wasn't always this simple, this quiet. Before Amelia was born, I owned a high-end construction firm. We weren't just building houses. We were crafting architectural marvels for the city's elite. I was respected, I was successful, and I was wealthy. My wife, Clara, was the heart of my world. She was a beautiful, gentle soul who cared little for the glitz and glamour that came with our money. She loved our garden, she loved her volunteer work at the local library, and she loved me. When Amelia came along, our world was complete. I worked punishing hours to build an empire for them, to give them a life of security and comfort. I remember coming home late, long after Amelia was asleep, just to peek into her room and watch the gentle rise and fall of her chest. I'd stand there, smelling of sawdust and sweat, and I'd promise her sleeping form that I would always protect her, always provide for her. But the stress of my work took its toll, not on me, but on Clara. The constant client dinners, the networking events, the pressure to maintain a certain lifestyle, it wore her down. She was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder, one that doctors said was severely exacerbated by stress. I watched the love of my life fade before my eyes. Her vibrant energy dimmed. Her easy laugh became a rare and precious sound. I tried to pull back from work, but the company was a behemoth, a machine that demanded my constant attention. The irony was suffocating. The empire I had built to protect my family was the very thing destroying it. When Clara passed away, Amelia was only 16. A part of me died with her. Standing by her graveside, I made a second vow. I would never again let the pursuit of wealth and status come before the well-being of my family. I would not lose Amelia the way I lost her mother. Within a year, I sold the company. It was a massive, life-altering decision. My business partners thought I was insane. My clients were stunned. I didn't care. I negotiated the sale quietly, through a trusted lawyer, and the sum I received was astronomical, far more than anyone ever suspected. I invested it all, diversifying the portfolio under the guidance of a shrewd financial advisor who was an old and trusted friend. I set up a labyrinth of trusts and holding companies, ensuring my financial security for generations to come. To the outside world, it looked like I had simply retired early after a modest buyout. I bought the small, unassuming house we lived in now, sold the flashy cars, and put away the expensive suits. I wanted a life of peace, of simplicity. I wanted to be present for my daughter, to make up for the years I'd spent more focused on blueprints than our school plays. Amelia, at first, seemed to appreciate it. We had dinner together every night. I helped her with her homework. We took long walks and talked for hours. But as she grew older, and especially after she started college, a change began to creep in. She became enamored with a world I had intentionally left behind. Her friends were from wealthy families, and she began to see my simple life not as a choice, but as a failure. She'd make little comments, casual verbal jabs that felt like tiny paper cuts. "Dad, don't you miss having nice things?" she'd ask, wrinkling her nose at my 10-year-old television. "My friend's dad just bought a yacht. What did you ever do with the money from your company?" I would just smile and say I had enough, that I had everything I needed. I never told her the truth about my finances. I wanted her to value things other than money. I wanted her to love me for who I was, not for what I had. It was a test, I suppose, one I desperately hoped she would pass. Then she met Stephen. He was the epitome of everything I had walked away from. He came from old money, or so he claimed. His parents, the Abernethys, were pillars of a local country club, dripping with condescension and brand names. Stephen himself was a slick, arrogant young man who worked in finance, a job that seemed to consist mostly of having expensive lunches and talking about his portfolio. He looked at my small house with a barely concealed sneer the first time Amelia brought him over. He eyed my old pickup truck, the one I used for fishing and trips to the hardware store, as if it were a piece of garbage that had washed up on his pristine lawn. I saw the way Amelia watched him, her eyes wide with adoration. She mirrored his snobbery, amplifying it. My worn flannel shirts became a source of her embarrassment. My love for gardening was now a dirty, peasant hobby. She stopped inviting me to her university events, making excuses that they were just for students. The distance between us grew from a crack to a chasm. I paid for her entire education at a top-tier private university, a cost that ran well into six figures. She never questioned where the money came from, simply accepting it as her due. When she graduated, I offered to help her with a down payment on a condo. She and Stephen looked at the amount I offered, a generous $50,000, a sum I thought was substantial enough to help without being excessive, and they scoffed. I overheard Stephen whispering to her in the kitchen, "Is that all? My dad gave my sister $1 million apartment for her graduation." Amelia's reply was a mortified hiss. "I told you he doesn't have much left." That was the moment I realized my test was a catastrophic failure. She didn't see my values. She saw my perceived poverty. She wasn't my daughter anymore. She was a reflection of the Abernethys greed. The wedding planning was the final nail in the coffin. It was all about Stephen's family, their tastes, their friends, their expectations. I was a footnote, an inconvenient detail to be managed. Amelia would call and talk for an hour about the floral arrangements or the ridiculously expensive venue they had chosen, the opulent Blackwood Manor, without once asking for my opinion. When I would gently inquire about the budget, she'd wave it off. "Oh, the Abernethys are handling everything, Dad. It's fine." The implication was clear. Your contribution isn't needed because it wouldn't be enough anyway. I was relegated to the role of a distant, impoverished relative, a ghost at a feast I wasn't even truly invited to. And then came the overheard phone call, the final, brutal confirmation of everything I had feared. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being actively hidden. I was an embarrassment, a blemish on the perfect, wealthy image she was trying to construct for her new family. The pain of it was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I sat in my quiet study, surrounded by memories of the wife I'd lost and the daughter who was now lost to me, and I felt a profound, bottomless grief. For an hour, I let that grief wash over me. I mourned the little girl I had raised, the bond one thought we had, and then the grief began to cool, to harden, to crystallize into something else entirely. It became a cold, sharp-edged diamond of pure resolve. She wanted to be part of the Abernathy world. Fine. I would show her what real wealth and power looked like. And I would do it by taking away the very thing she and her odious fiancé craved the most. My first call was to my financial advisor, Arthur. He was more than an advisor. He was a friend who had helped me navigate the lonely years after Clara's death. Arthur, I said, my voice steady and devoid of the emotion that was churning in my gut. I need you to do some digging for me. A deep dive. I want to know everything there is to know about Abernathy and Sons, Stephen Abernathy's family firm. Arthur, ever the professional, didn't ask why. He simply said, "Consider it done, old friend. I'll have a preliminary report for you by morning." The next call was to a contact from my old life, a man named Marcus who ran an exclusive high-end car dealership. Marcus specialized in sourcing rare and custom vehicles for the ultra-wealthy. "Marcus, it's Frank," I said. It's been a while. He was surprised to hear from me, but the warmth in his voice was genuine. "Frank, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Finally tired of that old pickup, I chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Something like that. "Marcus, I need a car, and I needed to make a statement. Something that doesn't just whisper money, it screams it from a mountaintop. And I need it yesterday." We talked for an hour about models, specs, and custom interiors. By the end of the call, I had commissioned a Rolls-Royce Phantom, a veritable land yacht, in a bespoke midnight blue with a cream leather interior and a custom starlit headliner. It was the most ostentatious, obnoxious, and utterly beautiful vehicle I could imagine. Marcus promised to have it delivered within the week, pulling every string he had. The report from Arthur arrived the next morning, as promised. It was even better, or rather worse, than I could have hoped. The Abernathy's were a house of cards. Their firm was leveraged to the hilt, teetering on the brink of collapse. They had made a series of disastrous investments and were being kept afloat by a mountain of debt. They weren't old money. They were no money. Their entire lifestyle was a performance, a desperate charade to maintain their social standing. And Stephen's marriage to Amelia? The report suggested it was a strategic move. They knew I'd once been successful. They likely assumed I had a tidy, but not vast, nest egg in a paid-off house. Their plan was probably to flatter and manipulate Amelia into getting me to invest in their failing company or sign my assets over to her. They saw my daughter as their lottery ticket, and they saw me as the doddering old fool who held it. The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. They were the paupers, pretending to be princes, looking down on a king who chose to live as a commoner. But the real bombshell was buried deep in the financial annexes of the report. Arthur had traced their lines of credit and their largest outstanding debts. And there it was in black and white. Blackwood Manor, the ridiculously expensive wedding venue, was owned by a hospitality group. That hospitality group, in turn, had recently been acquired by a larger private equity firm as part of a distressed asset portfolio. And that private equity firm? It was one of mine. It was a subsidiary of the main holding company where the bulk of my fortune was managed. Through a series of shell corporations and legal firewalls, I, Frank Miller, the poor, embarrassing father, was effectively my daughter's wedding venue's landlord. Not only that, but the Abernathy's primary business lender, the bank that held the loans keeping their company from imploding, was also an institution in which my investment firm held a controlling interest. I didn't just have a seat at the table. I owned the entire casino. A slow, malicious smile spread across my face. This was better than a new car. This was a checkmate I hadn't even known was on the board. The plan began to form in my mind, each piece clicking into place with beautiful, vicious precision. The car would be the appetizer, a shock to their system. The financial revelations would be the main course, a feast of humiliation. And for dessert, I would serve them the cold, hard reality of their own ruin. I spent the next few days in a state of calm, focused detachment. I was an architect again, drawing up the blueprints for their downfall. I had my lawyers draft the necessary documents, letters to call in loans and declare defaults, all prepared to be sent at my command. I felt no guilt, no remorse. Amelia had made her choice. She had chosen the Abernethys world of glittering surfaces and rotten cores. I was simply going to hold up a mirror and let her see the truth of it. A few days before the wedding, Amelia called. Her voice was strained, a forced, sugary sweetness that set my teeth on edge. "Daddy," she cooed, a name she hadn't used in years. "I know things have been distant, but Stephen and I would be so honored if you would join us, and his parents, for a small pre-wedding dinner tomorrow night. At Le Vrai, 8 o'clock Le Vrai, the most expensive, pretentious restaurant in the city. The place you want to be seen." The trap was being set. They were likely going to use this dinner to begin their campaign, to charm the old man and feel out his finances. Or perhaps it was Amelia's pathetic attempt at a guilt-assuaging olive branch before cutting me out completely. It didn't matter. They had just invited me to the premiere of my own show. "I'd love to, sweetheart," I said, my voice gentle and unassuming. "I'll be there." The next evening, I took my time getting ready. I ignored my old suits and instead put on a pair of simple, clean trousers and a comfortable, well-worn tweed jacket. I wanted to look exactly like the man they expected to see, the poor, simple father-in-law. I drove my old pickup truck and parked it a few blocks away from the restaurant. Then I walked. As I approached Le Vrai, I saw it. Parked right in front, gleaming under the city lights, was my new Rolls-Royce. The valet, who had been handsomely tipped and given very specific instructions, stood beside it, polishing an already immaculate fender. I took a deep breath, the cold night air steadying my nerves. The show was about to begin. I walked into the restaurant, and the maitre d', also part of my meticulous plan, greeted me by name. "Mr. Miller, a pleasure to see you again. The Abernathy party is waiting for you in the private dining room." I walked past the gawking patrons, feeling their eyes on my simple clothes. I could almost hear their thoughts. What was someone like him doing in a place like this? I found a private room. Through the glass, I could see them. Amelia, looking stunning in a silk dress, Stephen in a tailored suit, and his parents, a pair of perfectly coiffed vultures, looking bored and impatient. I pushed open the door. For heads swiveled in my direction. The smiles on their faces were tight, strained. "Dad, you made it," Amelia said, rushing over to give me an awkward one-armed hug. She smelled of expensive perfume and anxiety. Mr. Abernathy, a portly man with a florid face, gave me a limp handshake. "Frank, good to finally put a face to the name. Amelia has told us so much about you." His tone implied that what she had told them was not particularly impressive. Mrs. Abernathy, a thin, severe-looking woman, simply nodded at me, her eyes scanning my jacket with undisguised contempt. The color drained slightly from Amelia's face as she took in my attire. It was exactly the reaction I'd hoped for. The dinner was an agonizing exercise in condescension. They talked about their recent trip to Monaco, the trouble they were having with the staff at their summer home, and the soaring value of Stephen's stock portfolio, a blatant lie, as I knew from Arthur's report. They asked me questions, but they were not born of genuine interest. They were interrogations disguised as small talk. "So, Frank, what is it you do to keep busy these days?" Mr. Abernathy asked, swirling a glass of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. "A little fishing, a little gardening. I keep things simple," I replied calmly. "Simple is good," Mrs. Abernathy chimed in, the word simple dripping with pity. "It's so important for people in your position to have hobbies." Amelia was a nervous wreck, constantly trying to steer the conversation, laughing too loudly at Stephen's vapid jokes, shooting me panicked glances whenever I spoke. They were treating me like a charity case, a bumpkin they had to endure for one evening. And I let them. I played the part of the simple, slightly overwhelmed old man to perfection. I nodded, I smiled, I asked naive questions about their fabulous lives. I was letting them build their pedestal higher and higher, knowing that the fall would be that much more spectacular. Finally, the excruciating meal was over. Mr. Abernathy clapped his hands together. Well, this has been an evening. Stephen, my boy, have the valet bring the Bentley around. He tossed a key fob onto the table. It was a performance designed to be the final, crushing display of their superiority. We all stood and walked toward the entrance. As we stepped outside into the cool night air, the valet from earlier rushed forward. "Mr. Abernathy, your Bentley, sir," he said, pointing to a sleek but ultimately standard luxury sedan. But then another valet, the one I had arranged, stepped forward and addressed me, his voice clear and loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mr. Miller, we have your car ready for you right at the front." And there it was, the Rolls-Royce Phantom. It was less a car and more a celestial event, the midnight blue paint absorbing and reflecting the city lights like a captured nebula. The valet held the rear door open for me, the interior glowing with the soft light of the custom starlit ceiling. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Silence, for sets of eyes swiveled from the Bentley to the Rolls-Royce, and then to me, the man in the tweed jacket. Jaws literally dropped. Stephen's face went from smug to slack-jawed disbelief. Mr. Abernathy's florid complexion turned a pasty, mottled white. Mrs. Abernathy looked as if she had been slapped. But the most satisfying reaction was Amelia's. Her face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock, her eyes wide, her mouth a perfect O of astonishment. The color drained from her cheeks, and for a moment, I thought she might faint. "Dad?" she finally whispered, her voice a strangled squeak. What is that? Whose car is that?" I turned to her, my expression calm, my voice even. "It's mine, Amelia. I bought it last week. Thought I deserved a little something to get around in." Stephen took a step forward, sputtering. "That's a Phantom. That's a $500,000 car. How could you possibly?" He trailed off, the question hanging in the air. Amelia found her voice again, and it was a completely different tune. The embarrassment was gone, replaced by a frantic, grasping excitement. "Dad, oh my God, you never told us. You're rich." She laughed, a giddy, slightly hysterical sound. She grabbed Stephen's arm. "Can you believe it? My dad, he was just pretending to be poor all this time. It was a test. Oh, this is amazing." She turned back to me, her eyes shining with a greed, so naked it was repulsive. "Oh, Dad, you have to come to the wedding. You have to. You can pull up in this car. Can you imagine the looks on everyone's faces? You have to walk me down the aisle. We have to change everything." Mr. and Mrs. Abernathy were now looking at me with a new, predatory interest. The disdain was gone, replaced by avarice. They were recalculating, their minds spinning with the possibilities. I let them babble for a moment, letting Amelia's desperate, pathetic reversal sink in. I let her reveal the complete and utter transactional nature of her love. Then I held up a hand, and the world went silent again. "No, Amelia," I said, and the coldness in my voice cut through the night air. "I don't think I'll be coming to the wedding." Her face fell. "What? But why? Everything's different now. Is it?" I asked, taking a step closer. I looked at her, then at the Abernathy's. "Let me be perfectly clear. I am not coming to your wedding because I am not invited. I was in my study the other day. Amelia, the walls are thin. I heard everything. I heard you tell Stephen that I was an embarrassment, that my clothes, my truck, my very existence would taint the image you're trying to create." Amelia's face went from shock to horror. The blood drained from it completely, leaving her looking like a ghost. "You heard that?" she whispered. "I heard it all." I continued, my voice relentless. And it made me realize a few things. It made me realize that the daughter I raised is gone. In her place is a stranger who measures a father's worth by the car he drives. And it made me curious about the family you're so desperate to impress. I turned my gaze to Mr. Abernathy, whose face was now slick with sweat. So I made some calls. Abernathy and Sons. It sounds impressive, doesn't it? Except it's a sinking ship, isn't it, Robert? Leveraged to the point of absurdity, one bad quarter away from total collapse. You're not old money. You're just old debt. You were counting on my daughter to secure a lifeline from her poor old dad, weren't you? Robert Abernathy began to stammer, but I cut him off. "And the wedding? This grand affair at Blackwood Manor. A beautiful venue. I should know. I own it. That was the final blow. If the car was a slap, this was a knockout punch. Mrs. Abernathy let out a small, strangled gasp. Stephen looked like he was going to be physically ill. I looked back at my daughter, whose face was now streaked with tears. They were not tears of remorse, but tears of self-pity, of a dream being shattered. You wanted a wedding without your poor, embarrassing father, Amelia, I said, my voice softening just a fraction, not with pity, but with a sense of finality. And you're going to get it. You can have your wedding, but you'll have it without my presence, and you'll have it without my money. You see, the deposits you paid to the venue, the caterer, the florist, they are all non-refundable. And as the ultimate owner of those businesses, and as the primary lien holder on the Abernathy's corporate debt, I'm afraid I have some bad news. All of those debts are being called in, effective tomorrow morning. I believe the legal term is default. I pulled a crisp envelope from my jacket pocket and handed it to a stunned Stephen. This is the official notice from my lawyers. I think you'll find it's all in order. I turned my back on them, on the wreckage I had created, and walked towards my magnificent car. The valet held the door, and I sank into the plush cream leather. As the door closed with a soft, satisfying thud, sealing me off from their world, I looked at Amelia one last time through the tinted glass. She was standing there, frozen, a statue of broken dreams and deserved consequences. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. I told the valet my home address, and the car pulled away from the curb, as silent and smooth as a phantom, leaving them standing on the sidewalk with the ruins of their own greed. The aftermath was exactly as I had orchestrated. The Abernathy's financial house of cards collapsed overnight. They lost everything. The wedding was, of course, canceled. All their so-called friends from the country club abandoned them the moment the stench of failure became public. They became social pariahs. Amelia's fairy tale had turned into a nightmare. She called me, of course, dozens of times. She left long, rambling voicemails, alternating between tearful apologies and bitter accusations. I never picked up. I never called back. A few weeks later, she showed up at my house. I saw her through the window, standing on my porch, looking lost and diminished. I didn't answer the door. There was nothing left to say. The trust, the love, the bond between a father and daughter. She had set it on fire herself. All I did was refuse to help her put out the flames. Stephen, predictably, left her as soon as it became clear there was no money to be had. My life went back to being simple. I sold the Rolls-Royce. It served its purpose. I still drive my old truck. I still tend my garden. The money, the vast, silent fortune, is still there. I've decided to establish a charitable foundation in Clara's name, funding education and health care for underprivileged families. It's what she would have wanted. My wealth will now be used to build people up, not to be a weapon of revenge. The revenge was a necessary evil, a painful surgery to cut out a cancer of greed and disrespect. I don't rejoice in my daughter's misery, but I take a grim satisfaction in the justice of it. She learned a hard lesson about value and worth. It's a shame she had to lose a father to learn it. I found peace not in the grand gesture of the car or the financial takedown, but in reclaiming the quiet life I had chosen for myself, free from the judgment and entitlement of those who could never understand it. So what do you guys think? Did I go too far, or did she get exactly what she deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. I read every single one. And if you have a story of your own, I'd love to hear it. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories just like this one. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all in the next one.